South Korea believes it has a greater chance of sealing a trade deal with the U.S. by late this month in time for the Apec leaders meeting in Gyeongju. We have more on Press Perspective today. Hope your work week is off to a good start. It's Monday, October 20th here in Seoul, and you're watching Press Perspective. Today, we touch upon the latest in trade talks between Seoul and Washington, as well as trade tensions between Washington and Beijing. For more on this, I have Celio Fioretti with French daily Croix live on the line. Celio, it's great to have you on.
Glad to be here.
I also have Professor Song Soo-young at Chung-Ang University with us as well. Professor Song, welcome back.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, and my pleasure to be here.
Right. Celio, we'll start with you. Let's begin with news about tangible progress in trade talks between South Korea and the U.S.
Well, there's finally some tangible progress in the ongoing trade talks between South Korea and the United States. Seoul top advisor Kim Yong-bum said that the two sides have made what he called meaningful progress in negotiation over a massive $350 billion investment package that South Korea pledged back in July. This deal is key for Seoul since it aims to secure lower U.S. tariff on Korean exports. But until now, there has been some tension over how that investment should actually happen. At first, U.S. officials rejected Korea's idea of making the investments through loans or guarantees. Instead, it insisted that it needed to involve an actual cash flow. Now, Washington seems to be softening in stance. According to Kim, U.S. negotiator presented a new proposal showing that they better understand Korea's position. That is, simply, it cannot inject $350 billion in a single payment, and that could affect badly the country, South Korea, foreign exchange reserves. President Lee Jae-myung had warned earlier that agreeing to U.S. terms without safeguards could push the Korean economy into a crisis maybe similar from the IMF crisis in '97. Both sides are now hoping to finalize the deal by the end of October, just in time, as you said, for the APEC summit. And according to U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, Washington is also optimistic. He said this week that the two countries are very close to wrap up the agreement.
And in the meantime, Professor Song, what more can you tell us about the risks and rewards for South Korea of committing to such a large investment in the U.S. as part of course, securing tariff relief?
Yeah, actually, the Mr. Fioretti has already explained quite well the details of the ongoing negotiation between the past record of the negotiation between U.S. and South Korea. So, considering the current situation, my judgment against potential associated risk of this is going to be some kind of the liquidity crisis and maybe credit crisis, and eventually the solvency crisis will take place if the United States just insist on the upfront payment or very huge payment of the cash only. So to that regards, the risk associated with how to minimize the risk is like increased length of payment, so such as installment payment or annuity payment method would be under consideration. And on the other hand, then how to take the structure of investment, because originally South Korea would like to have some kind of loan or guarantee style investment, but actually the United States rejected it, and then how to compromise and how to share the risk and the return. Therefore, the return, U.S. would like to say that the return for South Korea is getting increment of the net exports, and that is going to be earning for South Korean economy. That's what the U.S. now under consideration. So that is net export is very uncertain, and then it means that that is a cash flow will take place in the future, so should be discounted. Then how much can you get altogether, because the payment of the $350 billion is just a direct cash, right? Therefore, increase of the payment frequency and increase the length of the payment. That is how the typical conventional control type of the risk associated with the payment. So, and then the reward is, as I mentioned, clearly the net export. Then the problem is, considering the hidden risk is because the US dollar, this is going to be beneficial for South Korean economy because weakening US dollar and losing the status of the US dollar's dominance around the world is a necessary condition for South Korean economy to minimize some associated risk. And because it could help reduce the burden of the South Korean economy. And also, we need some kind of a currency swap, which has been held twice in previous decades or more than decades. So later I'm going to mention that. So what would be the reward, or reward is very uncertain, that export increment, and then that could be possible because of the China and other countries definitely would like to reduce the dependency on that exports to the United States because U.S. is very vulnerable. But however, in the previous news has told us that I think the sustainability of the Trump government may be in doubt. So that is another some turmoil maybe. So to that regard, we should not pay upfront payment of altogether $350 billion.
Right. And Celio, as a foreign journalist based here in South Korea, what have you been hearing on the ground about this investment for tariff trade-off?
Well, here in Seoul, observers and analysts are divided but deeply engaged in the debate. The tone overall has been mostly cautiously optimistic, but also highly skeptical about the long-term implication of this deal. On one hand, many observers see progress, as we mentioned, with now U.S. officials appearing to understand the Korean position. It's seen as a sign of realism and a step forward. Some see this evidence that Seoul negotiators have managed to win some sort of breathing room and to avoid the financial pressure on Seoul. But at the same time, there's a strong sense of unease. Commentators and observers warn that this deal, even if it might look like a victory now, it could leave South Korea too tightly tied to Washington's economic and strategic agenda. And there's concern that Seoul might lose some of its ability to navigate independently between the U.S. and China, and especially now, given how tense the trade environment is in the Asian region, but also in the whole world. Other stresses also that the government needs to be transparent about what kind of investment these really are, whether they actually benefit Korean companies or simply fulfill Donald Trump's goals in Washington. Overall, the feeling among local observers is that this deal must be approached with caution. The progress is real, it's true, but the price of that progress, both financially but also in strategic terms, geopolitical terms, remains uncertain for now, and Korea needs to be very cautious about what is signing for where Korea is going with the U.S. on this deal. And that will be maybe the final aspect of the negotiation that will be maybe the hardest.
Right then, keeping in mind the concerns shared by Celio, Professor Song, what are your prospects with regard to bilateral trade ties, that is, between Seoul and Washington going forward? I mean, do you envision continued challenges under the Trump administration? And if that is the case, how capable is South Korea of constructively responding to such potential challenges?
I think the South Korea negotiator and the South Korea stance should be, even though we do not want to, we cannot but think of some surrounding situation. Particularly, I'm very concerned and intrigued in the position between the discussion between the president and the Chinese Vice Premier Li Hefeng in Malaysia. So this is very, it signifies a very important message to not only to South Korea but also to other countries in Southeast Asian countries, because we have seen the negotiation between U.S. and China has been held for the 4 consecutive months, except August. So starting from Geneva in May, and then the next was London and Stockholm, and then Madrid. So clearly it shows there is some kind of fluctuation, but still Trump always chicken out. So TACO prevails, that is true. Then what happened in Besant and Li Hafeng's recent dialogue between them is, even though they exchanged some harsh words against, not directly to the negotiator, but some lower ranked officers has been blamed. And even Besant has mentioned that the Chinese, some low-level senior who is participating in negotiation has been unhinged. So this is a very provocative words. And also China has argued that that is the total distortion of the situation, but still they talk with each other. So what matters is, recently, Besant plays a much more important role, and rather than Lutnick or Greer from U.S. representative. And South Korea is actually, the counterpart is like Lutnick, and not much talk with Besant. The reason is the most important client U.S. government bonds is China. So that's why Besant and in the previous, the Biden administration, the Janet Yellen has paid a visit to Peking several times in China. So then what matters is, because of the WTO has also urged both countries to have talk more and then reach some kind of deal. And then I think the no discrimination rule for the tariff and international trade should be advanced by China's geo-economic weapons, such as rare earth control. Then U.S. would like to have some differentiated or distinguished bilateral trade between U.S. and China. Bilateral trade would be different, maybe South Korea and the U.S. bilateral trade. But then we should claim that that should be equal, and no discrimination should be advanced to improve the status of the bilateral trade status for South Korea. That's what I think right now.
Right. Celio, as Professor Song has said, part of what perhaps complicates the South Korea-US trade ties is that the U.S. is also engaged in a high-stakes trade tension with China. In fact, what is the latest on that front, Celio?
Well, things are still tense between the United States and China, and the latest round of tariff threats has only made matter worse. President Donald Trump recently admitted that his proposed 100% tariff on Chinese goods isn't sustainable in the long run, but he insists that Beijing is to blame for the latest breakdown in trade talks. The tension escalated after China tightened export control on rare earth elements, which are critical for tech manufacturing. In response, Trump not only reimposed steep tariff, but also announced new export restriction on U.S. software set to take effect on November 1st. He said that China forced him to take his step. And in this sort of conflict, both sides are putting the blame on the other one for the escalation. But in the end, nobody really takes the responsibility of their action. And still, there's a bit of a mixed message coming from Washington. Despite the harsh rhetoric, Trump confirmed that he will meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping in 2 weeks in South Korea, saying that he thinks the two sides will be fine as long as there's a fair deal. That's his words. His softer tone actually helped calm Wall Street, which had been shaken by the sudden tariff hikes. But the meeting is not confirmed, and we're not sure if it's really going to happen. Meanwhile, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent spoke with Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng on Friday, calling it a frank and detailed exchange. The two men plan to meet again next week, but tension still remain high. Bessent criticized China's state-driven economic model, accusing of flooding global markets with cheap goods, while Beijing shot back, saying that U.S. is undermining the global trading system. even if the World Trade Organization, as we mentioned, has stepped in, warning that a full economic decoupling between the two world largest economies could shrink global output. So far, both sides they say they're open to dialogue, but the gap between them remains wide, and the world is watching closely to see if that summit between Trump and Xi Jinping will happen and if it can cool things down.
Right, and against that backdrop, Celio, Beijing's sanctions on US-linked units of South Korean shipbuilder Hanwha Ocean reportedly look to derail ambitious plans between Seoul and Washington to make American shipbuilding great again. And I'm quoting, of course. Could you walk us through this latest development and its ripple effects?
Yeah, exactly. This week tension between Beijing, Seoul, and Washington spilled into the shipbuilding industry, and it could deal a serious blow to one of the cornerstone of U.S.-South Korea economic cooperation. China has imposed sanctions on U.S.-linked units of South Korea Hanwha Ocean, a major shipbuilder that is central to Seoul and Washington plan to, as they put it, make America shipbuilding great again. And this sanction announced last Tuesday, blocked transaction and cooperation with Hanwha American subsidiaries, citing a vague security risk. Now, the move threatens to disrupt supplies of Chinese-made equipment and materials that Hanwha needs for shipbuilding projects in the U.S., including at the Philly shipyard in Philadelphia, which Hanwha bought last year. Seoul Defense Procurement Minister Song Soo-young admitted that the impact could be significant, noting that it's simply not possible to source all the necessary parts within the United States. Now, lawmakers in South Korea estimate the sanction could cost Philly shipyard up to $60 million over the next 2 years, mainly due to delayed delivery and disrupted supply chain. For context, Seoul has pledged a $150 billion investment in the U.S. shipbuilding industry as part of a broader trade deal, as we mentioned, aimed at reducing tariffs imposed by U.S. on South Korea, and also with this goal of revitalizing America's maritime industry, a sector that has been in decline for decades now. And Washington has sharply criticized Beijing action, calling them irresponsible and accusing China of trying to coerce South Korea and undermine their trilateral cooperation. And observers say the sanction may not cause an immediate shutdown, but they could signal a new phase of economic pressure from China, one that targets the very industries at the heart of the U.S.-South Korea industrial cooperation.
Professor Song, from an academic perspective, is South Korea facing its most challenging global trade environment in recent years, do you think?
Actually, not that serious, I don't think, because as Mr. Fioretti has mentioned, then I think the United States has its own weakness, is the domestic economic problem, the reduced some employment growth, and even though the growth rate of the GDP is quite impressive right now, but the problem is clearly shown in the employment level. And another one is the financial instability has been greatly increased, and the loss of the dominance of the US dollar around the world. So that's certainly, I would like to say, because of that, I'm convinced that Donald Trump is going to have a deal and some discussion with Xi Jinping in the Gyeongju in Apec meeting. And also, there should be a very good deal and saving face each other. And because 100% tariff imposed, that is mostly on the Chinese products such as light consumption goods, that could incur the serious damage for the consumers in the US. That could affect the change of the regime within the US, because definitely the Republican will lose their next presidential election. So that's why I am very optimistic about that. And another one part is recently the investment in the US has been welcomed, and I would like to see the role of the Masayoshi, who is Korean Japanese, and also digital, maybe technology, maybe guru in Asia. And he is winning some kind of support from the Trump. And so that would be of great a little bit of value for South Korea to make use of it. And then considering that the South Korea should offer and even think of the possibility of the total withdrawal of the U.S. Army, U.S. Armed Forces in South Korea, because that could help reduce the budget, the defense budget for U.S. And that is very good news for Trump. So that in order to do that, we must make some kind of some peaceful surroundings in Korean Peninsula. So I think Kim Jong-un likely to meet and have a meeting with Trump, because this is good for Trump, definitely. So that's why I'm a little bit optimistic. And then the possibility of the currency swap, we must demand it. And we have two experience in the 2008 and the 2021 in the outbreak, during the outbreak of the coronavirus. We have used, we have contracted with a credit, not this currency swap. And then that has been, could be possibly, even though temporarily, that could be held by, between the South Korea, and we demand it. Otherwise, we are going to fall into some kind of crisis that is not good, even not good for the U.S. Economy. So to that regard, I believe that I have a little bit optimistic view than the average perspective on the U.S. and China tariff deal, even though they exchange very harsh words, and as is mentioned earlier, that and the overcapacity, how to reduce the overcapacity, that is, I think, that is not Trump's concern at all. He is concerned is how to maintain and retain his power over the U.S. economy and taking as much as profit possible for his son and his some offsprings.
And speaking about China, Celio, very briefly speaking, China's ruling Communist Party begins this week a meeting to map out its plan for the next 5 years. Could you tell us a bit more about this particular gathering and its relevance?
Yes, China ruling Communist Party has opened a key 4-day meeting in Beijing, known as the Fourth Plenum, where leader Xi Jinping and about 370 senior officials will set the country's political and economic priorities for the next 5 years. This closed-door session is expected to finalize the 2026-2030 5-year plan, China blueprints for growth and reform. And the meeting comes, as we mentioned, amid rising tension with Washington ahead of a possible Xi Jinping and Donald Trump meeting later this month. Analysts said that Beijing will likely reaffirm its focus on technological self-sufficiency, an effort to counter U.S. exports restriction by boosting investment in areas like artificial intelligence, semiconductors. However, domestic challenge still remains, including a sluggish consumption, a property crisis, and an aging population.
All right, well, we'll have to wait and see once details of that meeting comes out later this week, perhaps. All right, Celio, as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. Professor Song, thank you very much for your insights.
My pleasure.
Right, on that note, we end Press Perspective for today. Thank you for watching.